Ladies and gentlemen, a hearty welcome to the celebration of the 159th birth anniversary of SWAMI VIVEKANANDA. A hearty welcome also to the distinguished speakers of today's celebration, His Excellency Mr. Sanjay Kumar Verma, Father Cyril Viliath, and Professor Tomihiko Taniguchi. This event has been organized jointly by the Embassy of India in Tokyo, Japan, and the Vedanta Society of Japan, the only branch of the Ramakrishna Mission of India in Japan. The theme of this year's program is the ideals of Swami Vivekananda, the prophet of modern India, to commemorate the 75th year of India's independence.
ご来場の皆様、スワミ・ヴィヴェーカーナンダ第159回生誕記念祝賀会にようこそお越しくださいました。また、舞台にいらっしゃるご来賓の皆様、駐日インド大使サンジェイ・クマール・バルマ閣下、ウェリアト・シリル神父、谷口智彦教授、ようこそお越しくださいました。本日皆様にスピーチを賜れますこと、大変光栄でございます。本祝賀会は、駐日インド大使館とインドのラーマクリーシュナミッションの日本支部、日本ベーダンタ協会との共催でございます。本日のプログラムは、インドの独立75周年を記念し、現代インドの預言者、スワーミ・ヴィヴェーカーナンダの理想をテーマに掲げております。
I am Kathy Ramos Matsui, a member of the organizing committee of the Swami Vivekananda birth anniversary celebration, and presently an educator of Seisen University. I am very much honored to be here today as your English language MC. The Japanese language MC will be Ms. Satsuki Yokota, a professional translator. Ms. Satsuki is a member of the Vedanta Society Manager Committee.
本日、英語の司会を務めますのは、スワミ・ヴィヴェーカーナンダ祝賀委員会委員、聖戦女子大学教授の松井ケティ。日本語の司会を担当いたしますのは、日本ベーダンタ協会責任役員、翻訳者の私、横田さつきでございます。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
First, we request you to check today's program, flyers, and other papers which are inside the envelope given to you at the reception.
はじめに皆様にご案内申し上げます。受付でお渡ししました封筒の中に本日のプログラム、チラシなどが入っておりますので、ぜひご覧ください。
We will now begin with the invocation. Vedic peace prayer will be chanted by Swami Divya Nata Nandaji, Leonardo Alvarez, Shanti Izumida, and Yumi Sumino, led by Swami Medhasa Nandaji, President of Vedanta Society of Japan.
それでは、はじめにベーダの祈りを捧げます。祈りを捧げていただきます方の名前は、ただいま英語の司会で申し上げた通りです。では、皆様お願いいたします。
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shangno Mitra Shangvarunaha Shangno Bhavatva Yama Shangna Indro Brihaspatihi Shangno Vishnu Rurukramaha Namo Brahmane Namaste Vayo त्वमेव प्रत्यक्षं ब्रह्मासि त्वमेव प्रत्यक्षं ब्रह्म वदिष्यामि ऋतं वदिष्यामि सत्यं वदिष्यामि तन्मामवतु तद्भक्तारम् अवतु अवतु माम् अवतु भक्तारम् ॐ शान्ति 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 हरिः ॐ मधुवातारितायते मधुक्षरन्ति सिन्धवः माधेन सन्तोषभिः मधुनक्तमूतोषसि मधुमत्पार्थिवगं रजः मधुदौरस्तु न पिता मधुमन्नो वनस्पतिर्मधुमाज्ञम् अस्तु सूर्यः माभिर्गावो भवन्तु नः ॐ मधु ॐ मधु ॐ मधु ॐ पूर्णमद पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ तत्सत् श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।
Next, Swami Vivekanandaji will lead a special prayer. You are requested to stand up and repeat the prayer. It will be followed by a silent prayer for a few minutes.
続きまして、スワーミー・メダサーナンダジーの先導で皆様に祈りをご唱和いただきます。全員で起立して祈りの言葉を唱え、最後に数分間黙想します。では、マハラジお願いいたします。
オームどうぞ。アサトマサドガマヤタマソマジョティルガマヤムリットルマअमृतं गमय सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्. So please sit down and we shall now translate it into, okay, it is already there. Now we have a silent prayer for the peace and welfare of all who have assembled here and for all or every being of this universe. 皆さんの幸せのために沈黙で祈りましょう。 ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
Now, a bouquet to Swami Vivekananda will be offered by His Excellency Mr. Sanjay Kumar Verma, Ambassador of India to Japan.
次にスワミ・ヴィベーカーナンダへの花束奉納の儀式です。花束をご奉納いただきますのは駐日インド大使サンジェイ・クマール・ヴァルマ閣下です。
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
バルマ大使ありがとうございました。
Next in the program is the release of the special issue of the Universal Gospel, a bi-monthly magazine of the Vedanta Society of Japan, by the Ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Sanjay Kumar Verma.
続きまして日本ベーダンタ協会の隔月刊行誌不滅の言葉特別号をバルマ大使にご披露いただきます。
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
バルマ大使ありがとうございました。
Now we request His Excellency to deliver his address.
ではサンジェイ・クマール・バルマ駐日インド大使にスピーチをいただきます。よろしくお願いいたします。
Swami Madhesanand-ji, President, Vedanta Society of Japan, Dr. Tomihiko Tamiguchi, Professor Kyo University, Father Cyril Velayeth, Professor Emeritus, Sophia University, friends, ladies and gentlemen, Namaskar, Konnichiwa. I'm truly delighted to be amongst you today as we jointly celebrate the 159th birth anniversary celebration of Swami Vivekananda-ji. This year assumes added importance due to the 75th anniversary of India's independence, celebrated as Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and 70th year of establishment of India-Japan diplomatic relations since 1952. Swami Vivekananda, who advocated positive thinking and service to mankind as the way to spirituality, have always been meaningful for the societal existence of all of us. He was not only a thinker, not only a philosopher, not only a humanist, not only a deeply spiritual leader, but also a true liberal and modernist leader. A spiritual genius who, commanding intellect and authority, his achievements during the short life of 39 years are monumental. He always preached to be courageous in the face of troubles, to be persistent, to achieve goals, to believe in oneself, not to shy away from struggling to grow, seek real happiness from selflessness, to be the best version of oneself, the importance of self-introspection. Honesty is the best policy, and all creations of God are born equal, and importance of empathy towards fellow human beings had been always paramount. All of these are as valid today as they were in yesteryears, and will certainly remain relevant for future years as well. His writings and his speeches, especially his celebrated speech at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in the year 1893 have a universal appeal, and he received a standing ovation when he said, "Sisters and Brothers of America." His speeches at the World's Parliament of Religions made him famous as an orator by divine right and as a messenger of Indian wisdom to the Western world. Swami Vivekananda, of all the spiritual giants of India, was the first to present the essence of Indian spirituality to the modern West. His teachings lay emphasis on tolerance, harmony, and mutual accommodation. They provide pragmatic guidance to all of us to reconnect with the inner self and serve the people around us. His ideas that a universal truth lies behind all faiths and that everyone possesses a divine spark that can be cultivated through meditation and study appeal to many religious leaders and liberals, like those who had organized the parliament and the perpetuated today in the movement that he founded, the Vedanta societies. Another embodiment of Swami Vivekananda's vision is this unstinting belief in the power of human spirit, the power to choose one's own destiny. All power is within you. You can do anything and everything, urged the Karma Yogi or the man of positive action, that is Swamiji. During his recent visit to Japan, Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji referred to Swami Vivekananda's special connect with Japan. Japan left a deep impression on his mind and on his heart. Patriotism, confidence, discipline, and cleanliness of the people of Japan found praise in Vivekananda's writings and indeed in his speeches. Influenced by Japan, Swami Vivekananda once said that we Indian youth must visit Japan at least once in our life. Swamiji was convinced that while India possessed the philosophical and spiritual truth, there was the need to practice modern scientific ideas and bring reforms. The Vedanta Society in Japan has reached out to wide sections of Japanese public through its non-sectarian approach based on the propagation of religious harmony and human values through spiritual and cultural programs. I take this opportunity to felicitate the Vedanta Society and Swami Madhesananda ji in particular for their yeoman service and contribution in providing that special connect between our two countries by enriching our spiritual linkages and social mores. Let us use this occasion to tirelessly work together and play our part in realizing Swami Vivekananda's dreams. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Dhanyavad. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your inspiring speech.
バルマ大使、どうもありがとうございました。
At this time, we would like to request the first speaker, Professor Tomohiko Taniguchi, to speak on Swami Vivekananda's concept of an ideal nation and how to build it. Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi is professor of Keio University Graduate School of System Design and Management. He worked with Prime Minister Abe Shinzo as his primary foreign policy speechwriter throughout the period in which Mr. Abe was in office. After receiving his law degree from the University of Tokyo, he spent 20 years in journalism before joining Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2005 as Deputy Press Secretary. He is an author of books and many articles. Professor Taniguchi will give his speech in English and summarize at the end in Japanese.
それでは講演に移ります。はじめに、慶應義塾大学大学院システムデザインマネジメント研究科の谷口智彦教授に、スワミ・ヴィベーカナンダが理想とした国家の概念と その国家の築き方をテーマにお話しいただきます。谷口教授は東京大学法学部を卒業された後、ビジネス誌の記者、編集者、海外特派員として20年にわたり活躍されました。2005年から2008年には外務省で外務副報道官を務められました。また、安倍晋三氏の2度にわたる総理大臣就任中には、総理の外交政策スピーチの起案を担当されていました。その他、著作、寄稿などの執筆活動も活発にされていらっしゃいます。本日は英語でスピーチをされ、日本語でサマリーをお話しされます。では、谷口教授、お願いいたします。
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and Swami Medhasananda Ji, Ambassador Burma, and Father Cyril Veliat, and friends and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak a little bit about Swami Vivekananda's ideal society today, and I will be summarizing paragraph by paragraph in Japanese. Now, I made a pledge some time ago that I should be doing whatever I could do in my capacity for the betterment of the Indo-Japanese bilateral relationship. As Prime Minister Abe Shinzo mentioned several times, the sky is the only limit for the relationship. Along with him, I have seen through my eyes the development of the bilateral ties and emergence of the new geostrategic framework of the Indo-Pacific, as well as of the quadrilateral defense cooperation, or Quad. I was, to quote Dean Acheson, present at the creation, together with the great Prime Minister, which partially explains my fondness of working on behalf of our two countries. しばらく前になりますけれども、私はある誓いを立てまして、自分にできることだったらどんなことでも日印関係の増進に力を尽くそうと思いました。首相の安倍晋三首相が何度も申しましたけれども、日印関係にもし限界、リミットがあるとすると、それは天、空だけであると。つまり青天井であると。私はこの目で、安倍総理と一緒に二国間の関係が発展するのを見ましたし、新たな地政学的な概念としてのインド太平洋の登場を見ましたし、さらにはクオッドが出現するものを眺めました。アメリカの国務長官にディーン・アーチソンという人がおりまして、その人の本のタイトル、その場に居合わせたというものがございますが、私はまさにそれでありまして、そのことはもしかすると、なぜ私が日印関係を大切に思うかということを説明するものであるかもしれません。Once one finds oneself intrigued by the richness of India's culture, tradition, religion, and spirituality, one is destined to encounter the greatest man of the great among the country's leaders, namely Swami Vivekananda. In such a way, I also did come to learn of the great man while I was hastily putting together good episodes and narratives with which I could perhaps write a speech for Prime Minister Abe in the run-up to his scheduled visit to Delhi, India, addressing the Joint House of Indian Parliament in 2007. 一度、インドの持っている文化の豊かさ、伝統の豊穣さ、さらには宗教や精神文化の豊かさというものに触れますと、必ずと言っていいでしょう、偉大な中でも偉大な人物に出会うことになります。その偉大な中でも偉大な人物というのがスワミ・ヴィーベカナンダ であります。私もそのようにしてこの人に出会うことになるのですが、その時は予定されていた安倍首相のインドへの訪問を前に、いいエピソードはないか、面白い物語はないか、急いで探していた時でありました。それは2007年に安倍首相がインドに行って、上下両院の議会に演説をするという、その準備をしていた時であります。Prime Minister Abe began his speech by referencing the spiritual leader thus, and I quote, "Different streams having their sources in different places, all mingle their water in the sea. It gives me tremendous pleasure to be able to begin my address today with the words of SWAMI VIVEKANANDA, the great spiritual leader that India gave to the world." Unquote. その時、安倍首相はスピーチをこんなふうに始めております。かの偉大な精神的指導者に言及しながら、たとえ流れがどこに発してどんな場所を通ろうとも、その流れは一つの水になって海で交わるのである。この言葉を持って自分のスピーチを始めることができるのはこの上ない喜びでありますと、こう安倍首相は言いました。I have just told you how I came to learn only a bit of Swami Vivekananda, and that brief encounter would later draw attention from Swami Medhasananda, who eventually urged me to speak on Swami Vivekananda, which was about a year ago at the occasion of the 158th birth anniversary celebration of the great teacher, which I duly accepted and delivered a speech. That's it. Nothing else. ただいま申しましたのは、このようにしてスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダをほんのちょっと理解するようになって、そのほんのちょっとの出会いというものがスワミ・メダーサナンダのお目に留まって、そして私にしゃべれと、こうおっしゃるわけでありまして、それをちょうど1年前、158回の生誕記念の日にいたしました。で、正直言ってこれだけであります。I do not exhibit humility here, as many in Japan do in these cases. I only reveal truth that I have no credentials with which I could make any substantive argument of your greatest of the greatest, for the two experiences mentioned above mean nothing. It is like 0 times 0. It is still 0. 私はここで日本人らしく謙譲の美徳を発揮しているわけじゃありません。今まで申しました2つの経験というものは、それをもって何かこのスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダについて、深い議論をできるような資格要件だとは思えないからであります。まるで 0×0 がいつまでたっても0であるようなものであります。Now, I must face up to the challenge. What a challenge! Swami Medhasananda gave me, and that is to address Swami Vivekananda's thoughts on ideal society. How dare I could be this much bold to address such a topic, philosophical one of all issues pertinent to Swami Vivekananda. いよいよこのスワミ・メダハサナンダ氏が与えてくださったこの挑戦に立ち向かわなくちゃいけません。それにしてもどういう挑戦なのか。スワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダの理想的な社会について、つまり哲学的な問いについてしゃべれということでありまして、我ながらはよくここまで万有が触れるものだと思っているわけであります。The great Hindu priest we are pondering was born on the 12th of January, 1863. To an amazement of many, I believe, about a month later, on the 14th of February in that same year, Okakura Tenshin was also born, that man of Renaissance who would develop close ties with Sister Nivedita and eventually Swami Vivekananda。ヒンズー教の偉大な指導者であります。そして私どもが今考えておりますこの人物は1863年の1月12日に生まれているんですが、驚くまいことか、そのほとんど一月後の2月14日に岡倉天心も生まれております。岡倉こそはかのルネッサンス型の人物でありますけれども、シスター・ニベディータと親交を結び、やがてスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダを知ることとなる人物であります。Okakura was a man of great awakening. He was the very first Japanese individual who looked at his home country's heritage of art and culture from the bird's eyes perspective, or I should say, from the Earth's satellite orbit's perspective. The ideals of the East with special reference to the art of Japan, the awakening of Japan, the awakening of the East, and lest it be forgotten, the Book of Tea were the books he published in English. 岡倉は目覚めた覚醒の人物でありました。そしておそらく自分の国の文化的なあるいは芸術的な遺産というものを長官的に眺めることができた。いやもっと言うなら人工衛星の軌道ぐらいの高さから眺めることのできた人物だったと言えるでありましょう。その著作には、東洋の理想、日本の覚醒、東洋の覚醒、そして忘れてならないものとして茶の本があります。いずれも英語で出版されました。We could all draw an observation simply by giving a glance to the list of Okakura's book titles that in his age, that is to say, in the age of Swami Vivekananda, the impact from the West inevitably led a select few in each country, India and Japan, to seriously contemplate what differentiates their home countries from the West. とこういうタイトルをちょっと眺めるだけでも、この時代に初めて西側と比べて自分たちの国はどう違うのかということを彼ら限られた少数のリーダーたちに深く考えさせたのだと思います。The ideas they came up with differed, and yet there is one thing in common between the two cases of India and Japan, which is that in order to see the difference between their respective home country and the West, they had to develop a holistic view with which they grappled with the wholeness of their mother country. ヴィーベカナンダや岡倉が考えた考えはそれぞれに違うかもしれませんけれども、一つ共通のことがあったとするならば、西側と比べて自分たちはという時のその自分たちについて全体的な、それぞれの国を全体として捉えるそういう目がなければならなかっただろうということであります。That holistic viewpoint was a prerequisite for the intellectuals of their age to construct ideas, ideals, and ideal types of their respective society.It was also to provide the nation with soil to grow patriotic awakenings. After all, unless and until one develops an idea that those from Hokkaido and those from Okinawa are all the same Japanese, there should be no such thing as national awareness. この全体的に祖国を捉えるという視野ですね、目の付けどころですね。これがあって初めてこの時代の知識人というものは自分たちそれぞれの社会について一体理想は何か、理想的な姿は何かというものを作ることができたのだと思います。またその全体的な見方があって初めて、愛国的な気持ちというものを作り出すこともできました。早い話が北海道の人も沖縄の人もみんな日本人だというこの全体的なセンスがなければ国民としての自覚というものも生まれなかったでありましょう。 Little wonder, therefore, that in the 1860s, the decade in which both Swami Vivekananda and Okakura Tenshin were born, also born included such people as follows: Rabindranath Tagore in 1861, Mori Ogai, the Japanese great author come army doctor, in 1862, Gabriel D'Annunzio, that controversial poet in Italy, in 1863, Max Weber, German sociologist, in 1864, Romain Rolland, who was a great friend of Tagore's, in 1866, Sun Yat-sen, China's revolutionary, in 1866, Natsume Soseki, another great author in Japan, in 1867, and lest we should forget, Mahatma Gandhi, in 1869. ですから驚くには当たりませんが、この岡倉とビーベカナンダが生まれた1860年には、このように次々と立派な人物が生まれております。タゴール、1861年、森鴎外、62年、イタリアの詩人のダヌンツィオ、63年、ドイツの社会学者ウェバー、64年、それからタゴールと親交を結ぶロマン・ロラン、1866年、中国の革命家孫文、1866年、夏目漱石、1867年、そして忘れるべきでないのはマハトマ・ガンディ、1869年であります。Among them, those worked in art and literature pondered for the first time who they are as a collective sum. In other words, as a nation or as a people. Who are the Japanese? Who are the Indians? Or in the case of D'Annunzio, who are the Italians? It is only from there those senses of ownership over, responsibility in the running of, and duty of leading the society sprung up. And my understanding is, no one but Swami Vivekananda better epitomized the prevailing zeitgeist. こういった偉い人たちの中に、特に芸術や文学で働いた人の中には、初めて一体自分たちはこの一体として感じられることのあるこの自分たちっていうのは何者なんだという疑問が芽生えたわけであります。つまり我々どんな国なのか、どんな国民なのか、一体日本人とは誰で、インド人とはどういう人間で、ダヌンツィオの場合であればイタリア人とはどんな人間なのかという問いです。そしてこの問いから初めて社会に対するオーナーシップのセンス、自分たちの社会だというセンス、それからこれを回していこう、切り回していこうということについての責任感、さらには社会を導いていこうという時の義務感が生まれるんだと思います。で、私の考えではスワミ・ヴィヴェカーナンダほどこの時代の雰囲気というもの、時代のセンスというものをよく体現していた人はいません。For the first time in history, society stopped appearing a God-given natural being. Previously, society was something that was just there, like the planet Earth. Ever present, it was not an object perceived to be constructible or deconstructible.Any longer, hardly. 歴史上初めて社会というものはまるで自然にそこにあるような、神様が作ってくれた自然にそこにあるようなものであることをやめてしまいました。社会というものはずっとそこにあるんだと、地球と同じようにこういうことだったんですが、ですからそういうふうに見ている間は社会というものを改造したり壊したりする対象と見ることはできなかったわけですけれども、もうそうはいかなくなりました。One reaches that realization better if not only when one transcends national and cultural borders, for doing so equips one with a much broadened perspective. こんな自覚に至ろうと思うならば、まずいろいろな文化ですとか国境ですとかを超えた方が容易に決まっています。Last year,At the same occasion of the birth celebration for Swami Vivekananda, I spoke of the masterpiece authored by Swami Medhasananda entitled the story of India-Japan relationship, Swami Vivekananda and Okakura Tenshin, the modern era pioneers, in which the author meticulously chronicled the steps Swami Vivekananda took in Japan on his way to Chicago. 昨年はちょうどこの場でスワミ・ビベカナンダのことをスワミ・メダハサナンダがお書きになった素晴らしい本、それはインドとジャパン、インドと日本の物語、関係についての物語、スワミ・ビベカナンダと岡倉天心、現代のパイオニアと、こういう題なんですが、そこでスワミ・メダハサナンダジーはシカゴに行く途中でスワミ・ビベカナンダが日本に立ち寄った時の工程を詳細に追っておられます。Common in our knowledge is what he subsequently did in the United States and in Europe. True, he was the first ever Indian leader who taught the largely Christian audiences in those regions of the Hindu religion and Vedanta in particular. Equally important, he turned himself a keen observer of how in each country, Japan, the United States, Britain, and so on, society was being run. Intended or not, he developed in his inner self a systems engineer who first of all looks at the wholeness of the society, second of all perceives it to be alterable, and third of all takes a long-term view when engineering an ideal society. アメリカに渡ったスワミ・ビベカーナンダはもちろんヒンドゥーの教えを、キリスト教徒の人たちに広めて、中でもベーダンタの教えを広めたわけですけれども、このようにして旅しているうちに必然的に彼の中に一種の社会エンジニアとしての自我というものが育まれたのだと思います。まずはその社会というものを全体として一体として眺めるということ、改造することができる何者なのかなんだと見ること、そしてアイデアル、理想的な社会を実現しようと思うならば長い視野を持たなければならない、こういう考えを彼は発達させたんだと思います。It is worth noting here that in the late 19th to early 20th century, when he traversed across the world, absolutely no nation was in any way close to ideal society. No nation, be it America or be it England, had mature democracy. ここで思い出してもいいんですが、19世紀から20世紀にかけては理想的な社会に近い社会どころか、成熟した民主主義を持っている国もどこにもありませんでした。The United States enslaved people of dark skin. Britain achieved prosperity by milking its colonies, India among others. Belgium was just about to embark upon the cruelest colonial rule in the modern-day Democratic Republic of Congo under King Leopold II. アメリカでは黒人たちは差別されていましたし、イギリスの富というものは植民地からの搾取によって、インドがその例で代表ですけどもによって実現されたものだし、ベルギーはレオポルド2世国王のもと、史上最も残酷と言ってもいい植民地統治に乗り出そうとしていた、まさにそんな時です。I should like to be enlightened as to whether Swami Vivekananda left any reflections on the disunity, disharmony, and inequality of the Western society in detail. Suffice it to say that for someone like him who believed that God is omnipresent and that all are equal and same, as all of them share divinity, societies he witnessed in the West must have given him a good example of what not to do. もしもスワミ・ビベカナンダが西欧社会を見て、その不統一ですとか、不調和ですとか、あるいは差別、不平等について何か書き残したものがあるなら教えていただきたいと思いますが、ここではひとまず、このように、スワミ・ビベカナンダのように、ゴッド、神というものが偏在するんだという考えを持っている人、そして全ての人がイコール、全ての人が平等で同じなんだという考えを持っている人物にとっては、西側社会で見たものというのはおそらく反面教師であったでありましょう。 when he began his monumental speech in Chicago by addressing the audience, "Sisters and brothers of America," he became the human's first ever proponent of, say, gender equality. Accidental may he have been. というのも彼がシカゴで大変有名になったスピーチをアメリカの Sisters and Brothers と始めたときには、彼は言ってみれば人類最初の男女平等主義者になったと言ってもいいかもしれないわけであります。To quote Hiltrud Rustow of Humboldt University, it expressed his firm conviction of the equality of man, no matter what his nationality, faith, sex, color, etc., and it also expressed the self-confidence of a man who, coming from a colonial country, proudly announced to the public that his country, poor, downtrodden, and starving as it was, had something valuable to offer the world. フンボルト大学のヒルトゥルード・ルスタウという研究者によりますと、この時のシカゴでの挨拶というものは人類の平等と、それは国籍や宗教や性や肌の色に全く関係ないんだということを言ってんだと。しかも、植民地の国から、やってきたこの人物には、あふれんばかりの誇りと自信があったんだと。彼の国は貧しいし、それから、飢えてもいるかもしれないけれども、でも世界に向かって素晴らしいものを提供することができるんだという自信であります。I should say, blessed are the Indians who had such a giant. こんなふうな素晴らしい巨人を持っていたインド人は幸いなるかなと私は申します。In order here is also to quote what Sister Nivedita said of SWAMI VIVEKANANDA, which I actually learned in a paper written by Subhadip Mukherjee of Jatindra Rajendra Mahavidyalaya, and I quote, "That society is the greatest, where the highest truth became practical," he observed. In an ideal society, there is no sphere left for privilege of force, wealth, intelligence, any kind of privilege for any individual or group on the basis of spiritual power or birth is negation of an ideal society. Vivekananda was very critical of the privileged groups of the society who oppressed the most of the society. In his opinion, this was the worst tyranny in the world. And I unquote. こういうことをシスター・ニベディーダっていう方がスワミ・ビベカナンダについて言っているわけなんです。つまり社会というものが偉大であるのは、最も崇高な真実というものが実践される社会においてである。理想的な社会ではいかなる意味での力に基づく特権というものも存在する余地がない。富に基づく特権だとか知識に基づく特権というものの存在する余地もない。いかなる意味での特権というものは、これは理想的な社会に対する否定であると、こう言っているというわけなんですね。Gaur Chandra Ghosh and Ram Krishna Biswas argued in their paper entitled The Concept of Democracy and the Relevance of Swami Vivekananda in the Indian Perspective, and I quote, Vivekananda says that the true nature of the soul of Vedanta will be to establish the unity among human beings along with the equality of right of the people. There is God in everybody. The society demands that kind of system where nobody will be allowed to enjoy special right, and everybody should have equal right and opportunity to enjoy. Everybody will have the opportunity to improve his or her ability, and there will be incentives for work. It will ultimately weed out differences in the exercise of rights. In this way, the weaker, depressed, and expropriated sections of the society will be able to take up power which is essential for democracy, unquote. 民主主義についてもヴィヴェカナンダは語っているわけなんですが、それもすべての人は平等である、すべての人の中に神が宿っているんであるという信念に由来するものなんだということなんですね。ですからどの個人も誰も自分というものを発達させる権利があるんだと。で、すべての違いというものはやがて取り去られるのであって、弱い人や抑圧されている人や搾取されている人というものを、がちゃんと力を持つという、それが民主主義なんだと彼はこうも言っているわけなんですね。By now, we can argue that his belief in the oneness of human beings, the omnipresence of God in all creatures, still resonates greatly among the Japanese who believe that their deceased parents, sisters, brothers, uncles, and aunts are present under the sod or in the shadow of grass leaves. One finds yet again the spiritual commonality between the Indians and the Japanese. とヴィヴェカナンダはこのように、あらゆる人間は一つなんだと。神は偏在するんだ。すべての生き物にとこう言っているわけですが、これは我々日本人によくわかる考え方じゃありませんか。今でも私たちは亡くなった両親や姉や兄弟や、さらにはおじやおばが草葉の陰で見ているというじゃありませんか。ここにも精神面でのインドと日本の共通性というものを見るわけであります。It is an apt moment now to pay more heed to what Swami Vivekananda said of an ideal society by largely relying upon the depictions Hiltrud Rushto gave in her paper entitled Swami Vivekananda's Ideal Society. 一体彼が考えた理想の社会とはどういうものか、もうちょっと細かく見てみましょう。For Swami Vivekananda, an ideal society is one in which unselfishness and renunciation of privileges can be realized. The ideal society has to guarantee liberty of thought and action, which is the precondition of life. Where it does not exist, the man, the race, the nation must go down, he said. Liberty means the natural right of man to use his body, mind, and property according to his own will, without doing any harm to other people. All members shall have the same opportunities to get education, to acquire wealth, etc. This natural right of man, Vivekananda considered to be unrealized in modern society, where the luxury of the wealthy people is ensured by the suffering of millions of poor people condemned to misery and ignorance. 理想的な社会というものは、特権というものがない。それからそれぞれの人間が、利己的に振る舞わない、そういう社会だ。そこにおいて思想や行動の自由というものは保障されていて、まさにそれこそが人生の前提条件でなければならない。もしそれがなければ人間も人種もグループもさらには国家も、墜落落ちていくしかないであろうと、こう言ってるわけですね。じゃあそのリバティって自由とは何か。それは自分の体、心、財産を自分の意思に沿って使うことができる力であり、同時に人を傷つけないということなんだと。で、全ての社会の全ての成員メンバーは教育を受ける権利も富を蓄える権威も、授かっているんであると。でもしこれが現代社会において、一部の富を独占する人たちによって損なわれているんだとしたら、それは大変、恥ずべきことだと、こういうことを言っているわけですね。The German scholar of India's philosophy, Hiltrud Rushto, went on to point out the following, and I quote again, Vivekananda's social thoughts were always centered on the life of the common man, but especially at the end of his life, he stressed the fact that the laboring masses were the backbone of the country, who by their labor are producing food. These poor people, the sweepers and laborers, who, if they stop work for one day, will create a panic in the town, unquote. ドイツの哲学者が引用しているスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダの言葉が続きますけれども、晩年になるとスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダは特に働く人々のことというものを考えて、彼らこそが社会の背骨、バックボーンなんだと言ったそうです。例えばそこらを掃除している人たちですね。もしその人たちが仕事を辞めてしまうと、一日にして社会がパニックに陥ってしまう。そういう普通の人というものを中心にして社会を考えるべきだと彼は言うようになりました。As is the case with a leader so towering as could be found only in the formative years of the nation, his was a big heart, so big that it heard the vox populi, raged at people's suffering, and felt acute the pain of the people. ある社会というものの創創期には、とりわけ現れるのかもしれませんけれども、喫立する個人、そして非常に大きな心を持っていた人なわけですね。その心というものはあまりにも大きいので、民の声を聞くこともでき、人々の苦しみに怒ることができ、そして人々の痛みというものを同じように痛烈に感じることができたのだと思います。To improve the Indian society, or for that matter, any society, for the achievement of social equity, is an effort worth not only a generation, but generations. インドでもその他のどこの社会でも、社会的な平等というものを達成しようとするならば、それは一世代でどうにかなるようなものでもありません。何世代もかかります。That much, I believe, is what he knew to the fullest, as none among his contemporaries observed politics, economy, and religious undertakings in the West as deeply as he did. To reiterate what was mentioned before, neither England, France, nor America exemplified anything akin to egalitarian society he wished for in his own country. このことというものは彼は誰よりも理解していただろうと思います。というのも、アメリカやフランスやイギリスで平等な社会というものは決して実現していないということを、西側の政治や経済、宗教活動などを見た彼はよく分かっていたはずだからです。Then the question to be posed is this: What would be the first and the most important step that the nation's leaders should take and continue to commit themselves to? じゃあ最初の一歩は何なのか。Swami Vivekananda, as a religious leader, a philosopher, and a systems engineer, had an answer that applies to our age as well. Education. 教育だと言いました。Though against the backdrop utterly different from what Swami Vivekananda viewed in India, Japan could not grow any longer without spending substantially more on education from the elementary level to one that is to help shift careers for the working adults. For it is people that generate growth which holds even more truth in this age of technological advancement. インドの当時とそれから日本の今とでは背景が全然違いますけれども、今の日本が成長するためにも人というものにもっとお金を使わなければならないということは火を見るより明らか。なぜなら人間こそが成長を生み出すことができる。特にこの技術的な発展の激しい世の中ではそう言えるからであります。Back to Swami Vivekananda's thoughts. What did he say of education and the value therein? じゃあ、ヴィヴェカナンダは教育について何を言っているのか。According to him, and I rely here on a paper written by Mohan Lal entitled Reflections of Swami Vivekananda's Ideas on Education, education is a process in which the young minds will receive strength, energy, and vigorous character. All knowledge and all powers are within. All knowledge comes from the human soul. Education is a man-making and nation-making process. It is the process which awakens the sleeping soul to self-conscious activity. 教育というものはその人の内なる何かを育てるものなんだと。なぜならすべての知識は人間の魂から来るんだと。力というものは人々の内に宿っているんだと。そういうふうに言ってるらしいです。教育はすなわち人づくりであり、国づくりでもあると。これは眠っている魂を指覚まし、活動へと促す経過なんだと言っているようです。Also in his own words, we want that education by which character is formed, strength of mind is increased, the intellect is expanded, and by which one can stand on one's own feet. What our country now wants are muscles of lion and a nerve of steel, gigantic wills which nothing can resist. スワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダはさらに続けて、教育というものは人格を作るものなんだ。心を強くするものなんだ。知性を拡大するものなんだ。そして人が自分の足で立てるようにすることなんだ。今自分たちの国インドに必要なのはライオンの筋肉、鋼鉄の神経、そして何者にも惑わされない巨大な意志なんだと、こう言っているようですね。I am aware that I am just putting together only fragments of his thoughts. Still, it is evident that his are the views one could also find among the great founding fathers of Japan's modernization, such as Fukuzawa Yukichi, or for that matter, similarity of thoughts could be found among Enlightenment philosophers elsewhere in the world. このようにスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダの発言の断片を集めてみたに過ぎないのですが、もうこれだけでもおそらく日本の明治時代の偉大な教育者たち、例えば福沢諭吉も同じようなことを言ってたなということがお分かりでしょうし、啓蒙時代の指導者というものも同じように言ってたと思うと思います。Fast forward to the present day. The life, the wandering, the thoughts, and a burning passion for his religious beliefs still stand as a beacon that awakens not only people in India, but also those in Japan. 現代に早送りして見てみたとしましても、スワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダの人生、そのアンギャ、インド中のアンギャ、さらには思想や燃えるような宗教に対するこのパッションというものは依然として輝くビーコン、輝く炎でありまして、それはインドの人たちを目覚めさせ、また私たち日本のものも目覚めさせるということができると思います。That in India you had Swami Vivekananda, of whose broad mind shared people's pain and suffering, of whose shining eyes still gaze upon us, and of whose ideas long remain a source of enlightenment, continues to earn admiration from across the world. インドにスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダという人物がいた。その広い心というものは人々の痛みや悩みというものを、共にした。そしてあのシャイニングアイズがいつも我々を見ている。また彼の思想というものがずっと我々に啓蒙の源となっているという、こういう国インドは我々の尊敬敬意というものを集めるわけであります。Japan under Prime Minister Abe chose to bring her ever closer to India. It was an act of investment into the country's richness in future growth potentials, sustained primarily by its education, which the great spiritual leader held so much dear, as well as an act of putting faith onto the country's future trajectory, for after all, you had Swami Vivekananda, whom you still greatly admire. And I conclude my speech by adding that I also admire him so very much. 日本は安倍首相のもと、インドに近づけるような決断をいたしました。それはインドが持っている豊かな未来の成長に対する一種の投資でありまして、その未来の成長の力というものは、スワミ・ヴィヴェカーナンダがあれほど大切に考えた教育によって支えられています。また、インドに日本を近づけたこの行いというものは、インドの未来の方向について信を置いている、信頼を置いているということでもありました。なぜなら、インドにはスワミ・ヴィヴェカナンダがいる。そして皆さんは依然として彼を深く尊敬している。終わりにあたって、私も敬意を払う一人であると申し上げます。Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Taniguchi, for your illuminating speech.
谷口教授、大変素晴らしいスピーチをありがとうございました。
Next, may we request our second speaker, Father Cyril Viliath, Jesuit priest and Professor Emeritus of Sophia University, to speak on the Swami Vivekananda's concept of an ideal man and how to make him. Father Viliath used to teach Indian philosophy and culture studies, also an author. Father Viliath has been deeply involved in the interfaith dialogues and took part in various seminars in connection with that. Father Viliath has contributed to Vedanta Society as a member of Swami Vivekananda Birth Anniversary Committee for many years and helped to promote the activities of the society in Japan in various ways.
続きまして、上智大学名誉教授のベリアト・シリル神父に、スワーミー・ヴィヴェーカーナンダの理想とした人間像と人づくりについてお話しいただきます。ベリアト神父は、上智大学でインドの哲学・文化についてのご研究・ご指導に当たられていました。著作活動のほか、諸宗教の対話に関して、現在も活発に取り組まれており、これまでにさまざまなセミナーに参加されています。スワミ・ヴィヴェーカーナンダ祝賀委員会委員として長年にわたり日本ベーダンタ協会の諸活動の推進にさまざまな形でご尽力いただいております。ではベリアト神父お願いいたします。
Your Excellency, Ambassador Verma, Dr. Taniguchi Tomohiko, Swamiji Medasananda, Swamiji Divyanathananda, and my friends. As you know, the subject of today's talk is Swami Vivekananda's concept of an ideal human being. Now, what sort of a person would Swami Vivekananda have viewed as an ideal human being? When we observe his writings, we notice that he has very clear views as to how human beings should be. And these are some of the statements he made about them. I'll just quote a few. According to him, human beings are the greatest of all created objects. And a perfect human being sees nothing but God. Every human being is perfect by nature. Some people can manifest this perfection, and so when we look at them, we can see this perfection in them. But there are others who may not be able to reveal this perfection, but the potential to become perfect is present in every one of us. Every human being is divine. Every human being is God by his or her very nature. Human beings have infinite power, and they can feel this power. They know clearly that they themselves are the one infinite God. You see, these are some of the famous statements made by Swami Vivekananda about human beings. Of course, he made them in different contexts and to different people. Now, recently, I happened to read a book on Swami Vivekananda, which was edited by a scholar called Verinder Grover. He's a well-known scholar, an Indian. And there, I came across the following words that Swamiji himself had uttered. Here, he speaks of what are called the great messengers. That's the word he uses. That is, holy and outstanding men and women of different religious traditions of the past who have appeared in this world, and this is what he has to say about them. People have the impression that there can be only one religion, only one prophet, and only one incarnation. That is not true. When we study the lives of these great messengers, we see that each person is destined to play a role in life. Harmony lies not just in the role played by one person, but in the roles played by all. No human race is born to enjoy the world alone. Each race has a role to play in this divine harmony. Each race has a mission to perform. Each race has a duty to fulfill. These are the words that Swamiji has uttered. Now, the great messengers that Swami Vivekananda speaks of here are obviously the great religious leaders of the past, those eminent men and women belonging to a diversity of races, various different races, different traditions, different creeds, and different historical milieus. They were motivated by a single message that was the message of love. For them, all that mattered was to love God and to love their fellow men. Very simple. Now, when I read this, I realized at once that these were the ideal human beings that Swamiji speaks of. These eminent men and women of the past, they spent their entire lives in loving and serving God and their fellow men, their neighbor, the people around them. These are the people he would like us all to emulate. Now, these great messengers are what we call mystics or saints. These mystics or saints are people who are always full of the love of God. But sometimes the love of God grips them so powerfully that they enter into a supernormal state, a state of unimaginable joy. This is what we refer to as the state of ecstasy. Now, when I read the life of Swami Vivekananda for the first time, that was many, many years ago, I learned that he also experienced the state of ecstasy. He experienced it when he met his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, at a time when he was personally very depressed and feeling low over various problems. Now, ecstasy is a state of joy, but scholars of mysticism say that sometimes the joy is so intense that it can become painful. The person suffers greatly, but it is a suffering caused not by pain, but by love and joy. Now, Swami Vivekananda described his mystical experience in the following words. You see, I've quoted a translation, one translation, but there are many. And I'm sure Swamiji knows some better translations than this. Anyway, I'll read it out. He, that is Sri Ramakrishna, came walking up to me. But before I could stop him, he had placed his right foot on my body. The contact was so terrible. With my eyes open, I saw the walls and everything in the room whirling and vanishing into nothingness. The whole universe and my individuality were at the same time lost in a nameless void which swallowed up everything I saw. I was terrified. I believed I was face to face with death. I could not stop myself from crying out, "What are you doing? I have my parents at home." And the great sage, he removed his touch from my body. I was then amazed to see that the extraordinary experience of mine had vanished as quickly as it had come. When he touched me in that manner and said those words, I came to my normal state and saw everything inside and outside the room standing still as before. Now, this was the experience that Swami Vivekananda went through, and historians say that after this experience, he became a totally different person. He was never again the same man. This experience opened a new road for him. It was the start of a new life. Now, how do Western scholars look upon such experiences? I'll just give you one example. In England, in the 19th century, there was a famous mystical poet, a man named William Blake. Now, William Blake was not a scholar of religion, but he had a great love for mystical experiences, and he described them in these beautiful words. I'll just read out the words. To see a world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. In other words, when on looking at a grain of sand, we can see the entire universe in it. When on looking at a flower, we can see heaven in it. When we realize that we ourselves are infinite and eternal, it means we have had an experience of the eternal God. This, I believe, is the ideal human being for Swami Vivekananda. The ideal human being would be a saint who has undergone an experience of God similar to what Swami Vivekananda himself experienced earlier. Now, let me give you an idea of the image of God that Swami Vivekananda had. Swami Vivekananda, as you know, was a reputed scholar. He had studied a wide variety of scriptures of different religions, including the Holy Bible and famous Christian scriptures, like, for example, the Imitation of Christ. You see, the Imitation of Christ is a very famous work, and Swami Vivekananda translated certain parts of it into Bengali. I'm sure every single one of these scriptures exerted a very powerful influence on him. However, I personally believe that the greatest impact on him was exerted by two scriptures of Hinduism, namely the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Now, how do the Upanishads describe God? They do so in a variety of ways. I'll just read out a few passages, not too much. God is described in the Upanishads as an eternal and transcendent reality that has no beginning and no end and who is changeless. Words cannot describe him. Although he surpasses all being and non-being, yet in a mysterious way, he pervades everything and he is the foundation or basis of everything. He is the Supreme Spirit, a boundless and infinite ocean of pure consciousness. He is all-knowing, he is blissful and immortal, He is infinite. He is smaller than the smallest atom, greater than the greatest spaces. He is the overseer of all activities. Now we have that famous historian on Indian philosophy, that is Das Gupta. You see, the historian and scholar Das Gupta notes that in the Upanishads, the highest reality, that is God, is not an individual separate from us. He is not someone whom we try to please or someone whose laws and commands we obey. He is not just someone to whose will we submit with reverence and devotion. Rather, he is the ultimate essence of ourselves and the highest principle of the universe. In Sanskrit, we refer to him as the Atman, the eternal soul, or the Brahman, all-pervading eternal reality. In chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna reveals himself to Prince Arjun in his supreme and glorious form as the Lord of all. I'm sure all of you have gone through this earlier. In that magnificent vision, Arjuna saw the entire universe within the body of Lord Krishna, a vision that resembled the light of 1,000 suns. Arjun was so overawed by that vision. He described Lord Krishna as the imperishable, the ultimate resting place of the universe, the undying guardian of the eternal law, and by many other names. So for Swami Vivekananda, an ideal human being is a person who has had an experience of the Supreme God, a mystical experience similar to what he himself had when he encountered his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna. An ideal human being is a person who leads a life motivated purely by love. His consciousness of God is so intense that he does not feel the need of using rituals, rites, or other symbolic means. What he means is that a person like that may not go to a house of prayer. He doesn't feel the need for it. He is a person who has such an intimacy with God that he has no choice but to radiate the goodness of God to all people and to everything around him. For an ideal human being, for a person who has had a mystical experience like that of Swami Vivekananda, the world that we see around us, will not be different after the mystical experience. The world we see around us will be the same as it was before, but the person will see the world through different eyes. There's a famous scholar on mysticism called Anthony de Mello, and de Mello describes it in the following way by using the example of Zen Buddhism. You see, a certain Zen master, when he attained enlightenment, he wrote the following words: "What a marvelous thing! I chop wood, I draw water from the well." Now, commenting on this passage, de Mello makes the following remarks. He says, "For most people, there is nothing special about activities like chopping wood or drawing water from a well. Every villager does it. After enlightenment, nothing will really change. Everything remains the same as it was before. The trees around will be the same trees, the people around will be the same people, and we also will be the same. However, there is one major difference. Now we will see all these things through different eyes." This is what happened to Swami Vivekananda after his mystical experience with Sri Ramakrishna. He returned to the same life that he had before. However, there was this major difference. Now he reacted to the world and to the problems around him in a totally different way. You see, in our Indian tradition, we have the Sanskrit term Jivana Mukta. I'm sure Swamiji knows this very well. You see, Jivana Mukta is a term that is used in Vedantic philosophy, and it signifies a person who has been liberated from the bonds of rebirth and who has attained God. But the person, he or she, is still alive, still has a body, still living among us. You know, a living saint. Now these people, they live and work among us just like normal people, but they have already had an experience of God. You see, if you look at the scriptures, they refer to them by different names, such as Atmanyani, one who has had an experience of his or her own soul, or Atman, or Brahmanyani, one who has had an experience of the all-pervading eternal spirit, or Brahman, what Christians would call the Holy Spirit. Now, some Vedantic masters did not accept the idea of Jivana Mukta. For example, we have the great scholar Shankaracharya of the 8th century, the founder of, the Advaita philosophy. According to scholars, Shankaracharya accepted Jivana Mukta. Or in English we call it non-dualism, in Japanese, Funi Ichigenron. Another person who also accepted it, just like Shankaracharya, was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu of the 15th century, whose philosophy was called Achantya Beda Beda, that is, incomprehensible dualistic non-dualism, or in Japanese, Fukashigi Fuitsu Fuiron. Both of them accepted it. But in the case of Ramanujacharya, who of the 11th century, some people feel, some scholars, not all, they feel that he may not have accepted it. Now, I personally did my doctoral research on Ramanujacharya. Now, there's one South Indian scholar, an Iyengar Brahmin by name Raghavachar. He feels that Ramanuja did not accept it. Well, scholars have their own opinions. Now, Ramanuja of the 11th century preached the doctrine of Vishishta Dvaita, or what we call qualified non-dualism, in Japanese, Seigen Funiron. Now, we are not very sure whether he accepted it. Now, coming to Swami Vivekananda, did Swami Vivekananda accept the idea of Jivana Mukta? My own personal answer is yes. My personal opinion is that not only did Swami Vivekananda accept the concept of Jivana Mukta, he was a Jivana Mukta himself. And not only that, he also regarded his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, whom he deeply loved and revered, as a Jivana Mukta. And so, for Swami Vivekananda, an ideal human being is a Jivana Mukta, a person who resembled his guru, Sri Ramakrishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Cyril Viliath, for your thought-provoking speech.
ベリアト神父、大変素晴らしいスピーチをありがとうございました。
Now, before the last part of the program, I would like to make a very important announcement, a few important announcements. There will be a 30-minute intermission following the closing of the first part of the program. We request you to kindly go to the main foyer for a light refreshment. Volunteer ushers will guide you. You are requested to kindly have the refreshments only outside this auditorium. Kindly note the auditorium rules. Consumption of food or drinks is not permitted in the auditorium. You are requested to kindly use the garbage bins for any trash. When you leave the auditorium, please do not leave anything behind. We deeply thank you for your kind cooperation. Okay. In the main foyer, there is an exhibition of CDs of devotional songs and books on Hinduism, meditation, Ramakrishna, and Swami Vivekananda, in both Japanese and English. Part 2 of today's event, the culture program, will begin immediately after the intermission. Kindly return to your seats by 4 o'clock. The culture program will begin with Indian classical dance, followed by devotional songs by Indian devotees and Japanese devotees.
ここで本日のプログラムの前半終了の前に皆様にいくつか大切なご案内をいたします。前半終了後30分間の休憩となります。ロビーでお菓子と飲み物をお配りしますので、スタッフの案内に従ってロビーにご移動ください。なお、ホール内では飲食ができませんので、大変申し訳ございませんが、ロビーなどでお召し上がりください。また、ゴミは必ずゴミ箱に入れ、施設内をきれいに保つようご協力をお願いいたします。なお、ホールを出る際には、必ずお荷物をすべてお持ちください。第2部ではお席をすべて入れ替えますので、休憩時間中にお席にお荷物を置いていくことはできません。ご不便をおかけしますが、ご協力、ご理解をお願いいたします。ロビーでは書籍や CD などの展示を行っております。ヒンドゥー教や瞑想、ラーマクリシュナ、ヴィベーカーナンダなどに関する日本語と英語の本、傘下の CD などを展示しておりますので、ぜひご覧ください。後半の文化交流プログラムは休憩の後すぐに始まります。4時までにホールにお戻りください。文化プログラムではインドの古典舞踊とインド人および日本人による賛歌をお楽しみいただきます。
And now, vote of thanks will be offered by Mr. Sanjeev Manchanda, First Secretary on behalf of the Embassy of India. He is also the President Director of the Vivekananda Cultural Center.
では、前半のプログラムの最後に、インド大使館を代表しまして、ヴィベーカーナンダカルチュラルセンターのディレクター、サンジーブ・マンチャンダ一等書記官から皆様へのお礼の言葉をいただきます。
Namaskar, konnichiwa. 私は今日皆さんのお迎えできてとても光栄です。I, on behalf of Vivekananda Cultural Center and the entire supporting team and Embassy Fraternity, and on my own behalf, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the distinguished speakers and participants for gracing this important joint 159th birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda ji. I would like to extend a big thank you to Honorable Ambassador of India, His Excellency Shri Sanjay Kumar Verma ji, for his unstinting support and valuable guidance for promoting India-Japan friendship in the country. Sir, we have heard your remarks today and found them very inspiring. You aptly quoted the Prime Minister Modi's statement here on Swami Vivekananda ji. Thank you very much, sir. I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation and gratitude for Swami Medhasananda ji, President, Vedanta Society of Japan, for upholding the ideas of Swami Vivekananda ji, who was a spiritual genius of divine path. The fact that this BCC auditorium bears the name of Swami Vivekananda is a testimony to his cultural legacy. Further, we are also grateful to Dr. Tomihiko Taniguchi-san, Professor, Keio University, for his ideas and speech on Swami Vivekananda ji's concept of an ideal nation and how to build it. I was personally very impressed when he chose that decade of 1860s to tell us who exactly the geniuses were born in that particular decade. Thank you very much, sir. I also wish to express my gratitude to Father Cyril Veliath, Professor Emeritus, Sofia University, for providing us encouragement and perspective for today's celebration. I was also very keenly following Professor Veliath's speech when he mentioned that Swami Vivekananda ji had a sort of a satori, which made him more exciting and crucial for attaining the virtual samadhi, eventual samadhi, which a human being aspires in this life. Thank you, Father. I'm also very grateful to the Vedanta Society of Japan, who would be after this break presenting devotional songs, both from Japanese and Indian devotees, and also a Bharatanatyam dance from Dhwani Dance Group. We would also like to convey our gratitude to Atsuhi Suzuki-san, Secretary, Vedanta Society of Japan, Shri Jagmohan Chandrani ji, Professor Kathy Matsui-san, and Ms. Sazuki Yokota-san. Finally, I would like to place on record our hearty thanks to the dedicated team from both Embassy of India and the Vedanta Society for their perfect logistical support and guidance. Please allow me to thank Taichi Watanabe-san, Nobu Maizumi-san, and Shri Vivek Chandji, who have worked tirelessly to make this event successful. I cannot thank enough to everyone for their involvement, and once again, thank and express my gratitude for all the speakers and most of all the audiences who are present today to celebrate this event of the 159th birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda ji. Thank you. Arigato gozaimasu. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manchanda.
マンチャンダ様、どうもありがとうございました。
So now it is time for intermission. We will begin again in about 30 minutes. Please return to your seats by 4:05.
では、これから30分の休憩に入ります。文化交流プログラムが午後4時5分頃に始まりますので、どうぞその頃までにお席にもお戻りください。また、その時にお会いしましょう。ありがとうございました。